global funds with local impact. We will examine the complexities of aligning global financial flows into India's diverse regional needs, policy environments, and development goals. It's not just about funding. It's also about forging partnerships that empower communities, accelerate decarbonization, and build resilience for generations to come. Let's welcome our next set of panelists. Mr. Meyyappan Nagappan, he's a partner at Trilegal. Warm welcome to you, sir. Huge round of applause. Let's also welcome Mr. Amit Kapur, partner JSA. And also let's welcome Srinath Sridharan, corporate advisor. And I'll be moderating this panel. Thank you, everyone. And thank you to all the panelists for being with us. Starting with the key point and the topic itself, financing Earth, multilateral moves that matter. I want to start off with you, Srikant, first, and try and understand for all our wider audience to really keep up with understanding how are multilateral institutions aligning the global financing for climate needs at this point in time, and what exactly are multilateral institutions?
So I want to start off with a joke. By no stretch of imagination, I'm alluding to anything. In most of our Indian family businesses, large conglomerate, we generally have a joke. You walk into the corporate headquarters to the key floor, you actually, if you are English speaking, if you have a PowerPoint, turn left. If you have Excel sheet, come to do business with us and negotiate, turn right. I think that's the intersection most of the multilateral institutions, at least when they preach to India, talking about our taxonomy, about our regulation, and about the way we should behave. I think that's the context they have.
Absolutely. Now, Meyyappan, help me understand, when we talk about such multilateral institutions, from a legal standpoint, especially, how are India's frameworks evolving to accommodate large-scale international centers in India that can deal with such large critical issues?
Yeah, so just to add to what Srinath was saying, I think currently multilaterals are sitting on sizable concessional capital. What they're looking for is frameworks that are giving them the confidence to sort of deploy it, making sure that use of proceeds is guaranteed through the regulatory measures. And I think there are a lot of initiatives or interest in India on the legal and regulatory side now from multiple regulators for, to fulfilling their own mandates. So I believe we are at an inflection point, and I don't think keeping the overall climate financing requirements in need, it is still very less, just focusing on multilaterals. I think the financing gap is very large. Government financing won't be sufficient. We do need to have mechanisms to enable blended finance, and sort of when it comes to multilaterals who are going to play a key role in terms of providing concessional capital. Usually in most of the APAC regions, they're trying to align their perspectives with priority areas for the governments in the region. So whether it is food security, water, in terms of sectors, they typically tend to prioritize the similar national priorities. But when it comes to the frameworks and taxonomies, we have heard that there is a mismatch in terms of, typically countries such as Indonesia, Philippines, India come up with our own taxonomies to drive capital towards specific areas. But then with respect to multilaterals, they sometimes follow European taxonomies, and then we have challenges in meeting those standards. So that's sort of where we see ourselves today.
Right. Amit, let me come to you. Meyyappan was talking about how blended finance, probably that's being seen as a key enabler right now.
May I first address the question that you asked?
Yes, absolutely.
I think that's a bigger issue. So at the end of the day, we must understand that India's preparedness in moving forward on the path is premised on your legal, regulatory and policy framework.
Yes.
As luck would have it, we have right now a multi-headed hydra. You have at least 5 ministries, if not more, that look after climate finance, so nobody looks after it beyond a point. You have Ministry of Environment Forests, which has got climate change. You've got Ministry of New Renewable Energy. You have Niti Aayog. You have Ministry of Finance, Department of Economic Affairs. The taxonomy came from there.
Yes.
Then you have Bureau of Energy Efficiency. You'll have 5 other regulatory institutions like RBI, SEBI, and regulators in power. So what you don't have is a unifying factor. The golden thread that runs through is not there. And given that the Prime Minister has taken the lead, we have created an ISA, which incidentally is, I think, 129 to 130 countries in the world are in it. It is next to UN virtually in terms of our international footprint. You need to hark back to that, and I'm combining the first and second question, and look at how you could leverage that footprint while unifying your policy approach for the nudge to try and incentivize financing. Let me put two data points on table. India has projected a target of $1.7 trillion of investment for national infrastructure pipeline. That includes, is not limited to energy. India has, Niti Aayog has projected $2.5 trillion for climate finance in the same 5 years. Plausible? So the push is needed much harder than you think.
Absolutely.
Because several aspects of infrastructure that will attract financing are not necessarily as attractive in climate finance. And by the way, we are in 25.
Yes.
The target is 2030. It's not 40.
Yes.
So
right now.
At the core question, and I thought so, given that you've already told us we are on a guillotine in time, may I commend that we get into that? Because if you ask me about blended finance
Yes.
and climate finance, we are scratching the surface. And there can be anecdotal evidence around it, but I think we have deeper questions to work with for the next 12 minutes that you have ticking away as we do. So may I comment that we move in that direction, because the policy thought piece to pull it together, to incentivize mitigation of the risk that comes along with it,
Yes.
to credit enhance the investment proposition, and then to ensure that you have actually the pull factor, because money is there. It's not there's lack of money. I'm sure my colleagues will tell you there is money there, provided you give the right quality and right level of financing needs with the right structures.
Okay.
I think we are missing that. And the last point I'll leave, and then we can debate it out. India announced in COP26 carbon markets. We are still evolving carbon markets. It's 3.5 years gone, 4th year coming. Now please understand, these implementations are now getting accelerated because Europe has announced CBAM, which will come and guillotine your exports to Europe from 2024. It is only because in January 26 that we'll face that pressure, that we have moved faster on this. We need to have a driver on a different agenda. That is the missing piece.
Absolutely.
That is what will bring awareness, that is what will bring capacity, and it'll bring obviation of overlaps between 5 to 7 ministries and 5 to 7 regulatory institutions, align them so that their combined effort is not neutralizing, but actually strengthening and invigorating. I would leave it at that piece, and I'd invite them to jump in, because now it's 10.5 minutes.
For sure. Amit did talk about that, money is there. But I want to understand from you, Srinath, that, we were talking about it as well. India has 1/6 of the world's population, but we do not have that 1/6 of the wealth. How in that case, are we looking at creating the capacities that will be needed to tackle the climate crisis that is at hand?
See, I think, why do people give money? I mean, look at it two aspects. One is to either profit from it, which means the return has to be far higher than what I invested in and what I would make in my own markets. And the surety of that money coming back, which means contractual enforcement and the market's ability to repatriate money. Second is out of goodness. And I think we have also, seen the misplaced sense of goodness with each of the COP promises of the Western nations, saying we will do climate financing and all of that. So I think it's time that we realize, and also this narrative of global South and North is not going to take us too long. There is enough depth of domestic capital available, and that's something that May has been working for quite some time. But the ability to attract that in the form of embedded finance, you need to create trust, confidence. And it's not about large bombastic narratives or speeches or hashtags. Can you give clear guarantee of narratives, of legal structures? You put in money, you lead. It could also be in the form of government front-loading some of these expenses or projects for climate, and then getting in embedded finance, because a lot of these so-called new age climate projects are risky by nature. And we need somebody to bring in that risk capital. And there is money available, but again, we keep saying that India will need $15 trillion in the next 25, 30 years for climate change projects. The reality is, if we are so gung-ho about our GDP growing at 7.5%, 8% every year, we should not be really worried. There is domestic depth available. The fact that we still are struggling with harmonized taxonomy within India tells us something, that not all the pillars of policy regulations are speaking to each other. I would be very delighted as a citizen if FSDC takes up climate change as a very, very important policy decision. This is the body of all regulators that meets every quarter, which is for the Financial Stability and Development Council, headed by the Union Finance Minister. If climate finance is not part of that agenda, I don't think we are really serious about climate change. These kind of conferences, we can keep talking. Taxonomy, we heard for 3.5 years, and what we have seen is probably scratched the surface. Yeah. And I think it's going to take us under 3 to 4 years before we get deeper on that.
Absolutely. If you could add on to that and also help me understand, Meyyappan, when it comes to the legal frameworks, are there any tools that can help de-risk such kind of climate-made investments that the corporates are dealing with right now?
Yeah, so just to quickly sort of add to what the other speakers have said also, I think, we've been trying to do blended finance structures for over 10 years in this space. And I can tell you from that experience, yes, definitely there are more progressive regulators like SEBI who have come up with, social impact funds. And it's not that efforts are not underway. What has changed in the last 10 years is to say that earlier just explaining these sort of concepts was kind of challenging with the regulators. Now the question is not whether we should regulate, is how do we regulate it? And I think what's driving this is clearly there is a market failure. Financing has not been serious enough about achieving these sort of goals. So now regulators are beginning to step up. And what I see this as different verticals. In addition to some of the ministries and regulators that Amit had mentioned, I would also add a Ministry of Corporate Affairs and Ministry of Home Affairs to the list as well. Because when we are talking about blended finance, clearly after COP29, there is no multilateral financing coming. There is no money coming in through that mechanism. There is a public finance is not going to be enough to finance this. We can't rely on taxes. Already the cost of capital is quite high for investments. If we're going to do a carbon tax, that's going to increase it even higher. So the only two pools of money that we have, if we want to leverage and bring in sort of private capital, is philanthropic money, which is under the CSR bucket and which is regulated under the FCRA bucket. So CSR is low-hanging fruit. I mean, that is the bare minimum that we should be unlocking, and this has become a more urgent need, especially in the larger global context where Trump has now sort of taken a stance, and USAID has been rolled back, so development financing has further been rolled back.
Yes.
So we are left to looking at our own sort of requirements at this stage, and while voluntary carbon markets and carbon sort of sales are picking up, I think institutionally we have not done enough to sort of support it.
Correct. Srinath, could you comment on to that? We are usually seen as aping the West, and something that Meyyappan just marked out, when the West, the biggest developed countries, when they're rolling back on such large issues, how do we continue to sustain what we are at, what we have set out for ourselves to do?
We have two challenges that the West does not have. Population is one. That's something very clear. And our fixation and fascination with the West. ESG, by the way, is only a 20-year-old modern framework by the UN. But does it mean that Indian society did not have concern for nature, people? Otherwise, we would have killed each other and none of us would have existed. I mean, anarchy would have taken over, right? I mean, if you look at the entire history of Indian epics and various history, it speaks about our love for nature and so on and so forth. So I think we will have to reinvent ourselves to figure out what is it that we can do. So I think today I'm very excited when I look at climate tech companies, the startups, the youngsters coming with the solution, because they're going hyper-local. We cannot create solutions sitting in Mumbai, in BKC or in Delhi to make policies for what will happen in one pin code, because we may not even understand the climatic changes in that pin code. And I think the other one is more important. If you look at 7,200 kilometers of coastline, India is one of the largest blue economy population around. We're not even speaking about it. What about our agriculture? So there are so many resilience that we need to build in. I would say that let's go hyper-local to have conversation. And that is why we'll have to take it to mainstream India.
Absolutely. Amit, coming to you. So how do we ensure, when we talk about large-scale climate finance, that translates into on-ground inclusive approach and not just probably finance the large assets as we speak at this point in time?
Go back to old habits. Just to supplement Srinath, would it surprise us to know that Kautilya's Arthashastra, at least at 5 passages, talks about forest, abuse of forest, penalties for it, regulation and governance principles around sustainable development. 1986 is when Brundtland report came and the West woke up to it. I don't know why we are not just going back to our roots and rebuilding from there. I don't know why in our education curriculum, we used to have moral science when we went to school. Why don't we have sustainable development and awareness of climate as a part of curriculum for awareness? Because awareness goes a long way. When you switch from a plastic bottle that we saw 3 years back in the same conference to a glass bottle, it's awareness.
Correct.
You carry a bag with you, it's awareness. And it saves so much. So I think there are a lot of low-hanging fruits that are also not being addressed. And only because there are 4 or 5 ministries and 8 or 10 regulators who are trying to just go around in circles without getting a direction and moving forward. So that's, again, I'm reiterating the point because I think a few points are critical in a 15-minute chat rather than doing multiple.
Sure.
In terms of implementation, the question that you asked, the question ultimately is, on the one side, where is the demand? Unless you have awareness and consciousness around the cost of not doing so, you will never, and unless you price that externality. Today we don't price the externality of a black electron and the substitution of that by green. What does it mean for the lungs of our children? What does it mean in terms of livelihood? What does it mean in terms of productivity? If we don't price that and we don't have awareness around it, the pull factor is not there. Our willingness to pay 5 paisa, 10 paisa extra to get much cleaner, healthy environment for the next generation will not be there. We need to do that. Lot of the rest of the retail and complex structures will come only at big corporates. But this is cross-cutting 140 crore plus people in their day-to-day lives in all walks of life. From the time a child is born to the time you're buried or burnt to the fire, everything we do and don't do has a carbon footprint. Yes. We should be aware of that. And therefore our choices will be informed. So unless that is there, you can't have regulators running after 140 crore people. We'll have to start guiding and developing this around ourselves. The rest will follow.
Absolutely. Just last word from you, Meyyappan. You were talking about the Indonesian example that you wanted to share about as to how we implement in India as well. Could you explore that?
Yeah, so I think we have a lot to learn from what other countries have tried in terms of enabling this financing. I think there are interesting, examples that have worked to some extent in Indonesia and have failed for several reasons. One of which is, multiple regulators, multiple laws, not having a central institution or body which is empowered and has the mandate to kind of solve for this problem, which is clearly a significant issue. The couple of other things that are also critical to make this a reality is not just policy and regulation, but there's a lot of capacity building that is required to be done at the private sector level and at the grassroots level as well. And I think this is something private sector should take seriously because regulations are coming in their direction whether we like it or not. And capacity building in terms of tracking these emissions, whether it is at the bank level, whether it is at issuing loans, how are we assessing climate risks in terms of business decisions? I think that is missing in terms of internal institutional capacities at this point in time. It is of deep interest. And again, in terms of the MSMEs or the borrowers who are vying for this money, there has to be a concerted effort to train them as well to make this work.
All right, just 10 seconds for you if you could wrap up and give our closing comments.
So very simple. I think in whatever policy regulations we roll out, we'll have to take our states into account. Without, collaborative federalism, this topic will not take off at all. Just a quick point, if let's say, for example, if you're going to levy a cess, environmental cess in any of the central taxes, states won't like it because no cess needs to be shared with the state by the constitution. The taxes will be shared, but not the cess. So which means unless the states get a share of the money, they're not going to take anything. So how do we involve the states? Because it's not about which party or who's ruling now. It's about whether we will survive the next 40 years. That's important.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, gentlemen. It's been a fantastic conversation. Big hand, ladies and gentlemen. And may I please invite on stage Mr. Siddharth Basu Chatterjee to come up on stage and present a token of appreciation to all our distinguished guests. Thank you so much.